The Rachel Maddow Show, weeknights at 9 Eastern on MSNBC.
How to make a nuclear bomb. Step one, get blueprints. It's not that hard. They're not all that complex. There are darker corners of the internet. There are even darker corners of the used book trade where you can find pretty detailed instructions for how to build your own atomic weapon. There, for example, is a truck driver named John Coster Mullen from Waukesha, Wisconsin, who not only self-taught himself how to make a nuclear bomb, he actually built it. A full-scale, accurate replica of the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945. And this Wisconsin trucker, he wrote a detailed sort of loose-leaf book about how you too could build an accurate replica of a working nuclear weapon. There are copies of that book still here and there. So step one for building a nuclear bomb, figure out how to build a nuclear bomb. Turns out that's not the hard part. The hard part is step two, obtaining the nuclear material that makes a nuclear bomb go boom. The Hiroshima bomb in 1945, it was basically, structurally speaking, a gun. Inside the outer casing that looked like a cartoon version of a bomb was basically a gun mechanism. It used an explosive charge to fire a piece of highly enriched uranium into another piece of highly enriched uranium. And that created a nuclear reaction and a nuclear explosion. That was the first bomb. The second bomb the U.S. dropped on Japan 3 days later, that one did it a different way. The Nagasaki bomb, again, used an explosive charge, but in this case, it was used for a different material. The Nagasaki bomb used an explosive charge to squeeze together a hunk of plutonium, not uranium, but plutonium. And that is how the Nagasaki nuclear reaction was set off. Those two American bombs remain the only two nuclear weapons that have ever been used as weapons in wartime anywhere on Earth. And we have not come up with a lot of new ideas about nuclear weapons since then. It's still basically those two kinds of weapons. Pick one. It's either a uranium bomb or it's a plutonium bomb. For all of the complicated politics and history around this issue, the logistics of it are pretty simple. Uranium is something that can be mined all over the world. It is a naturally occurring thing. When uranium comes out of the dirt, it contains less than 1% of the isotope, the particular kind of uranium that's useful in a nuclear context. So in the dirt, it starts off at less than 1%. But if you enrich that uranium, if you enrich it to 4 or 5% of that particular isotope, well, 4 or 5%, that's the level that gets used in nuclear power reactors. But you don't have to stop there. You can keep going. You can keep enriching it by the same means from which you got from 1% to 5%. Eventually, if you keep doing it, you will enrich your uranium up to about 90%. And then you've got something useful for a bomb. And it's hard to do, and you need a lot of raw material. It's hard to enrich uranium all the way up to weapons grade, all the way up to 90% plus. It's hard to do, but it's not that hard to do. And the nation of Iran has been enriching uranium to 20% enrichment for quite a while now. In the new deal, the new framework of a deal announced with Iran today, Iran says they will stop enriching uranium to 20%. They are hereby agreeing that they will not enrich uranium above 3.67% for at least the next 15 years. Because they have been enriching uranium for a while. They've got a big stockpile of enriched uranium already. They've got about 22,000 pounds of enriched uranium inside Iran right now. As part of this framework deal announced today, they also said they'll give up that stockpile. They're going to give up 97% of the enriched uranium they've already got laying around. Now, the way you enrich uranium is you use centrifuges. You either use, forgive me, but you either use kind of lousy ones, like these ones that were designed in the 70s and that run on software that's basically Atari level, or you use good, advanced, new centrifuges that enrich uranium much faster and much more efficiently than the old ones. Iran in total has about 19,000 centrifuges right now. In this new deal, they have agreed to go down from 19,000 to 6,000. And they agree that the 6,000 can only be the old crappy Atari ones, not the good ones. So even if you just look at those little pieces of it, you can already see why this is a really big deal. But that's just uranium. There's two paths to the bomb, right? You could have a uranium bomb or a plutonium bomb. A Nagasaki-style bomb is built with plutonium, and plutonium is something that you don't just mine from the earth. You have to make plutonium. And you can make plutonium for a nuclear bomb in basically two different ways. In nuclear power plants, after fuel rods, uranium fuel rods, are used to make nuclear power, they are called spent fuel rods. And when they are spent fuel rods, they are freaking radioactive as all get out. That is part of why it has been so anxiety-producing to see the spent fuel rod pool totally screwed up and fuel rods broken and bent and spread everywhere at the Fukushima power plant that blew up in Japan in 2011. Spent fuel rods, honestly, are a little scary. They are a huge, dangerous nuclear waste problem, and there are a ton of them at nuclear reactors all over the world that are just being piled up and piled up and piled up with nowhere to put them, and everybody hopes they're just going to be safe. Those spent fuel rods, though, can also be reprocessed into plutonium, which can make a nuclear bomb. Yay! That is another part of the deal with Iran today. Iran apparently does not now have the technology or the know-how to make plutonium that could be used in a bomb by reprocessing spent fuel from nuclear reactors. They apparently don't know how to do that right now. They don't have the technology to do it. They have now agreed in this framework deal today that they will not develop that reprocessing ability. They will not develop it, and they will not research it. There is, however, one other way to get plutonium. And that is with a specific kind of reactor where you don't have to reprocess anything. It just produces plutonium as a byproduct of running that reactor. Iran has built one of those reactors, or at least is in the process of building one of those reactors at a place called Arak, which is confusing because it sounds like Iraq, the country, but it is Arak, A-R-A-K. Which is both a delicious Lebanese liquor that tastes like licorice, and also the location of Iran's heavy water reactor, Arak, A-R-A-K. Well, today, Iran agreed to take their Arak reactor apart. They agreed to take it apart and rebuild it so it won't make weapons-grade plutonium anymore. Look, this is from the fact sheet they put out about the deal today. Quote, Iran has agreed to redesign and rebuild a heavy water research reactor in Iraq so it will not produce weapons-grade plutonium. Quote, the original core of the reactor, which would have enabled the production of significant quantities of weapons-grade plutonium, that core will be destroyed or removed from the country. Wow. So if Iran does all of these things, they can, yes, still look up how to build an atomic weapon, basically at the library. But all of us can do that. If this deal works as intended, the idea is that they will not be able to get nuclear material to put in such a bomb. They will not be able to get either highly enriched uranium or plutonium. And so, therefore, they're basically aiming at what that Waukesha trucker was able to do, but nothing beyond it. This is not a done deal. It is not signed. It is an agreement to try to work from here toward a signed deal by the end of June. The Republican reaction to the announcement of this framework and the president's remarks about it today is basically exactly what you would expect. 6 years into his presidency, though, we know that that's how they would react, even if what he was announcing was that he had personally cured cancer. They would then be against that cure. The international reaction thus far is basically elation that this vexatious issue that has been such a nightmare for so many countries on Earth, imagining Iran with a deployable nuclear weapon, there has been elation today that that prospect might have been averted, not with a war, but with the radical idea of talking it through. Now the question is it enough? Will it stick? And will we be our own worst enemies in trying to make it come true? Joining us now is Joe Cirincione, president of the Plowshares Fund. He is the man who I think is better than anybody else in the country at explaining nuclear things to non-nuclear people. Joe, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Rachel.
First, let me ask you if I explained any of that wrong. I fully admit I might have.
That was brilliant. We got to package that. We have to show it in schools around the country. There was a couple of small details, but not worth getting into.
Oh, come on. Go on. Tell me. Correct me. Seriously. Go on.
The Arak reactor.
Yes.
It actually does make plutonium in the fuel rods, and it does have to be reprocessed, which is why this agreement is so significant, because it bans Iran from ever having a processing facility. It assures that whatever fuel does come out of that reactor has to be shipped out of the country. So in addition to reconfiguring the core so it doesn't produce much to begin with, there's all these redundant steps. And why is this a big deal? A few years ago, Israel was saying that reactor was the main threat. They were going to be able to produce plutonium, and Israel might have to bomb that reactor before they put the first load of fuel in. gone. No Iraq reactor to worry about. That is no longer a threat. The plutonium path has been completely cut off.
Well, when they say, well, let me interrupt you, Joe. When they say that that should be rebuilt and reconfigured
yes.
so that it doesn't produce large amounts of weapons-grade plutonium, you're basically saying that that you can't necessarily make it stop producing plutonium as long as it exists. They just have to make it produce that less efficiently and then take away the plutonium once it's made.
Exactly. Every reactor core produces some plutonium in the fuel rods. The original design, they would have been producing about 8 kilograms, enough for 2 bombs a year. Completely reconfigure the core, less than 1 kilogram, not enough for a nuclear bomb.
In terms of the objections raised by the Israelis, and you mentioned that Iraq reactor, one of the things that I know both they and Iran hawks in this country have talked about is one of the Iran facilities basically being unbombable, an underground facility that they built that has been an enrichment facility. People were very concerned that it would basically, you couldn't enforce anything against it because it was too protected from even a military strike. What's the resolution of that in this deal?
Right, so here's another threat that we can start to check off, assuming this deal is implemented and all the details are worked out over the next 3 months. The Fordow facility, deep underground, Israeli bombs can't penetrate. They really wanted the enrichment activities there to stop. That's what this deal does. We're going to leave some of the centrifuges, but they cannot be used for any uranium enrichment. They can use to purify other gases that can be used for scientific purposes, and this is a ban that lasts forever. That facility can never be used for uranium enrichment again.
So much of these points of agreement, particularly that one that you just mentioned, they depend on Iran basically being inspectable. Right? There being foreign scientists present, that there being foreign inspectors, that there being total transparency about what they're doing, that they can't cheat or occlude from international view what they're doing. How strongly do you believe that that's possible, and what would be the consequences if they kicked some inspectors out? Yeah,
the Iran nuclear complex is sprawling, but it's not infinite. With enough inspectors, enough cameras, enough safeguards, you can inspect this, and that's probably the biggest breakthrough in this historic agreement today. Iran has agreed to an unprecedented level of inspection. Such a deal has never been negotiated in the history of the nuclear age before. We're going to have cameras, seals, inspectors. We're going to track uranium from the time it comes out of the mines through the processing until it's stored in cylinders as a gas. We're going to have the entire supply. We're going to have export controls. We're going to look at what they're importing, what they're exporting. We're going to have inventory controls. We're going to be tracking the scientists, the engineers in these plants. So if 200 scientists don't show up someday at Natanz, we're going to go, well, where are they? And this gives you the assurance that during the lifetime of this agreement, you'll be able to catch Iran should it try to sneak out or break out or creep out of this agreement. And in addition to our intelligence assets we already have trained on Iran, we'll be in a much better position to detect any covert activities. Joe, do you think that domestic political pressure, either in Iran or in the United States, is going to be strong enough to potentially derail this before they get to a final agreement at the end of June? Or do you feel like this is going to be given enough breathing room to maybe stick? Well, there's going to be a fierce fight, and you see the people who've been opposed to this deal for political or ideological reasons are still going to be opposed to it. But this deal is so sweeping. It is so stunning in its detail that it's going to be very hard to resist it. There's already a political victory today. Mr. Kirk, who had just a few days ago claimed he had 60 votes to bring a new sanctions bill to the floor of the Senate. He's just announced he's going to delay that to July. So whereas a week ago it was heading for action in the Senate, now he can't even get a vote on it. And I think what's going to be critical to this is when the American military and security establishment weighs in. This is a very convincing agreement, and I think you're going to find broad support among national security professionals. Joe Strincioni, president of the Plowshares Fund, thank you very much for your time tonight. Thank you for letting me make you tell me I was wrong and how. I really appreciate it, Joe. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks, my friend. All right. We got lots more ahead tonight, including some more really interesting news, interestingly, about Senator Mark Kirk of Illinois. All of a sudden, he's making a ton of news on huge national issues, and it's for one very specific reason that nobody's really talking about. So we'll be getting to that. Also, there's more news out of the great state of Indiana, where Republican leaders thought they were going to have a nice, calm week. It has instead turned out to be pure
sometimes joyful chaos. Details on that ahead. Stay with us.
Our work is not yet done, and success is not guaranteed. But we have a historic opportunity to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons in Iran, and to do so peacefully, with the international community firmly behind us. We should seize that chance. Thank you. God bless you. God bless the United States of America.
The full video podcast is no longer available, but The Rachel Maddow Show still is. Check out the full episode audio podcast or watch the show online anytime at now.msnbc.com.